Hello and welcome to a new video. I'm Vanguard and today, we'll be going through where I believe Final Fantasy 15 failed in certain aspects story-wise. The game was released quite over a year ago and at the time, this was by far my most anticipated game. And for the longest time, I did want to talk about this title, but I didn't quite have the motivation until now, seeing the Royal and PC editions come to life. I want to dive into this game and critique what went wrong and how it could have been better on release. I'll be talking mainly about what the base Final Fantasy 15 released as in November 2016, and the problems I believe still persist. Don't get me wrong, I thoroughly enjoyed my experience with the game, and I have many fond memories with it. However, there were some things that I just wish were better, and crucial elements that were just absent at times. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So let's start off at the very beginning. The first signs of development for early concepts of the game began in 2006. At the time it was known as Final Fantasy Versus 13, with Nomura as the original director. There were little to no news over the years on this game, which led to people believing that it may eventually be cancelled. Fast forward to 2013, Tabata took over from Nomura. The entire development team was reshuffled and the entire process started over again. The game was publicly rebranded at E3 of the same year as Final Fantasy 15.
いや、世界は常に変化する。15番目だ。
Over the next few years we got a movie, an anime, 2 demos, a lot of trailers and etc. before the release of the game. After all the promotion of the gameplay from the demos and trailers, and the storyline from the movie, anime and promotional material, the audience were led to expect a fun and a great story-driven game. My main issue in Final Fantasy 15 lies in 3 main areas of the story: a lack of characterization for some important members of the cast, the lack of setup for many pivotal moments, and pacing issues. I was shocked that these 3 points were such negative and strong aspects when completing the game, after all the effort put into the promotions that they did for the story with the movie and anime, which by the way should have expanded the elements of the final game, nothing more. However, instead, especially the film, filled in pretty big holes that should have been answered in the game. For those that didn't watch it, I assume would have felt quite confused in the beginning. But before we dive deeper into the problems, I like to contrast it with positives and the differences it makes. For me, the 4 main characters, Noctis, Ignis, Gladio and Prompto, and the experience that the players shared with them were the strongest strengths of the game. I genuinely cared for them in the end and was pushed emotionally to hope for a happier ending. They were written really well, but why is this so? From the very beginning, the direction of the game pushed for a story of brotherhood, which was further enhanced by the anime. We saw their relationship flow with great depth and really were relatable like humans. Whether it was exploring, fighting or on the car, we got constant exposure of their interactions, creating authentic memories for the players. They all had their unique quirks, sense of duty, and a reason to see the journey to its end. This is why moments such as the ending stuck out so well to me in regards to Noctis' farewell, as it was properly set up to invoke an emotional reaction from its players. I cannot say the same for many of the major events of the game. A lot of people like to use the death of Luna as a point of criticism, as many believe the game barely or never even built a relationship between Luna, Noctis and the audience that the players can sympathize with, therefore it really had little emotional value. This is because there seemed to have been a lack of display of interactions between the two. The game didn't really spend enough time to build the loving bond that very much exists between Noctis and Luna. When we see their past in flashbacks, it's to build the world in relations to their duty, rather than their actual childhood relationship and the joy they had in each other's presence. We witness in few instances of them yearning to be together again, like in their happiest days, but I would argue we never really got to see those days, so it's harder to care when the players have to fill in the blanks. The lack of setup hugely decreases the payoff of the excellent beautiful scene of their final moments, which we knew the developers were pushing for as one of the more powerful highlights of the game, as we see from the magnificent use of CGI. Everything about the scene was enthralling, even down to the emotional facial animations that Noctis had. It's a shame that it really could have been one of the greatest moments ever in video games. However, due to the lack of setup and characterization, it became nothing more than a pretty scene in a game. The meaning was lost, or more accurately, it was never constructed. I honestly don't know who Luna is as a character, other than her devotion to her duty as Oracle. The death of Noctis' father was something that felt lackluster, and wasn't a moment that struck to me as emotional. From the trailers we got over the years, I felt as though there was a bigger story between father and son that was being hinted at. But in the end, his role in the story was underwhelming, and we got to see nothing of their history together and how the connection flowed. The dramatic scene where Noctis expresses his sadness as he remembers his final moments should have resonated with the audience much more, as this was the first major step to the maturing of Noctis to take his role as king. Final Fantasy XV tells a story of Noctis, and it's strange that people like Luna and King Regis weren't given the proper spotlight that they deserved. The styling change and pace in the second half of the game didn't really feel like it was executed properly for me, and I think it's due to its transition to a narrative that really felt rushed. Games like Nier Automata had a striking change in tone at one point of its game that uses it to its advantage, embellishing its overall storyline. It was something that no one saw coming, but the change still retained a large portion of what the beginning set up the story to be, and gave its players time to come to terms with these changes. With Final Fantasy XV on the other hand, the change in atmosphere was jarring, throwing a lot of promise made at the beginning out of the window, and suddenly I felt like I was playing two separate games. Things that were seemingly significant introduced to the world, such as characters of Rayvis, Luna and Vestil, the location of Tenebra, the Emperor of Niflheim, and even the Kingdom of Lucis, were only some of the things that didn't meet my expectations when it comes to exploring its relevance in the story. I would have liked for more of the story to have been spread out throughout the game, or a longer period of time to play the second half. Progression just happened way too fast, with little setup for my taste, where Rayvis had a sudden change of heart, the Emperor became a demon after no involvement in the story, Prompto's random last minute mention of his backstory, and the revelation of Arden's past, which needed way more expansion to express the drive behind his motives. It is certainly strange that the death of Luna felt minuscule in comparison to Ignis becoming blind in the scene right after, because for me, him becoming blind had meaning. We actually saw the bond between Ignis and Noctis, with Ignis keeping a constant close eye on the prince. Also, I just love his character in general, so his loss in sight really meant something to me. I just knew far too little about Luna to care for her. This is why some people look back at the Final Fantasy vs 13 Days, where Stella was a part of the story, and wish that we got her instead. From what we saw in the trailers alone, I already had a stronger understanding of Stella as a person. Just from the way she interacted with Noct tells me so much more about the relationship, which I already care more for. Of course, I can't say for sure who Stella was, we will never know, but I did see potential. The story of Final Fantasy XV is good, even great. However, the execution, presentation, and setup was really poor in certain critical parts of the game. An analogy I can think of to describe this game is a terrific book with multiple missing pages. It is clear that there was a lot cut out of the final product judging from the trailers alone. I just wish they preserved some of the CGI scenes from the trailers that in my opinion would have actually increased my enjoyment with the game. They already made these cutscenes with Regis from the trailers, so it really wouldn't have been hard to just add them in the game. But those additions alone wouldn't have been enough to fully portray Regis' character as a worried father, for the duty he has passed to his son and the strained relationship that they have. But it would have been something. We have received multiple DLCs, free updates, the Royal Edition, and probably more other materials that add to the story. I do commend the developers for working on some of the problems, but a good portion of the 3 DLCs would have made a more complete experience, and it just seemed like it was cut out from the original game. The involvement of the DLCs in the game were great, however without the DLCs we are left with a wide open hole that feels random. What I mean by this, for example, are the events such as Ignis suddenly becoming blind, Gladio leaving out of nowhere and coming back with a scar, and Prompto's sudden dramatic revelation of his backstory. Without the DLCs, the experience is incomplete. But I will say in episode of Ignis, Rayvis did have a legitimate showcase of why he had a change of heart, with Ignis physically knocking sense to him. The free updates, Royal Edition and etc. do add some small story and awesome gameplay improvements, however nothing substantial that directly addresses my problems from what I have seen. So the conclusion to where I believe the game failed are the characterization of some characters, setup and pacing of the story. They nailed the aspects of the sense of brotherhood, though it isn't perfect like I just mentioned. Due to these problems, the story failed to deliver its promise of a strong narrative from its marketing of trailers, movie and anime. It is saddening to see from my assumptions that the game was rushed, but at the end of the day, the game did give me a fun experience that could have been so much more. That about wraps up this video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Thank you all for watching, until next time, I'll see you later.